Welcome dear audience, students and scholars. Here I am Dr. Amjad Ali. In this video we will learn about the open economy. Dear scholars, once Benjamin Franklin said that no nations was ever ruined or destroyed by trade. Even if you never leave your hometown, you are an active participant in the global economy. When you go to the grocery store, for instance, you might choose between apples grown locally and apples grown in China. When you make a deposit in your local bank, the bank might lend those funds to your next door neighbor or to a Chinese company building a factory outside Beijing. Because our economy is integrated with many other around the world, consumers have more goods and services from which to choose, and savers have more opportunity to invest their wealth. Till now we have discussed our analysis by assuming a closed economy, but in real world, however, most economies are open. They export goods and services abroad, they import goods and services from abroad, and they borrow and lend in the financial world financial market. Okay, international flows of capital and goods. The key macroeconomic difference between open and a closed economies is that an open economy, a country spending in a given year need not equal its output of goods and services. A country can spend more than is produced by borrowing from abroad, or can spend less it produce and lend the difference to the foreigners. To understand this concept fully, we have to look on national income account identity again. But for that we have to discuss the role of net exports, international capital flows, and the trade balance. And we have the empirical example on international flows of goods and capital as an empirical example. Okay, while discussing about the role of net exports, consider the expenditure of an economy's output of goods and services. In a closed economy, all output is sold domestically and expenditure is divided into three components: consumption, investment, and government purchases. In an open economy, some output is sold domestically and some is exported to sold abroad. Okay, the expenditure of an open economy's output Y can be divided into four components: CD, consumption of domestic goods and services; ID, investment in domestic goods and services; and GD, government purchases of domestic goods and services; and X, exports of domestic goods and services. Then the division of expenditure into these components is expressed into the national income account identity. Y is equal to CD plus ID plus GD plus X. So the first three terms, CD plus ID plus GD, is the domestic spending on domestic goods and services, and that's the fourth term here, the foreign spending on domestic goods and services. Okay, while discussing about the role of net exports, a bit of manipulation can make it this identity more useful. Note that the domestic spending on all goods and services equal the domestic spending on domestic goods and services plus domestic spending on foreign goods and services. Hence, total consumption C equal the consumption of domestic goods and services plus consumption of foreign goods and services, and total investment equals the investment in domestic goods and services, and plus investment in foreign goods and services, and the total government purchases G is equal to government purchases of domestic goods and services plus government purchases of foreign goods and services. Thus, C. Now we substitute these three equations into identity. Above we have y is equal to total consumption minus foreign consumption plus total investment minus foreign investment plus total government spending minus government spending on foreign goods and services. Okay, it can rearrange to obtain y is equal to c plus I plus d plus x minus cf plus if plus gf. So the sum of domestic spending on foreign goods and services, we have c plus I plus cf plus if plus gf. If the expenditure on import, we can write it im. So thus we can write the national income account identity as y is equal to c plus I plus d plus x minus im, because spending on imports is included into domestic savings c plus I plus g, and because goods and services imported from abroad are not a part of country's output, this equation subtract the spending on imports. Okay, defining the net export. While defining net export to be exports minus imports, so we have net exports is equal to exports minus imports. Okay, then our identity become as y is equal to c plus I plus g plus nx. So this equation states that the expenditure on domestic output is the sum of consumption, investment, government purchases, and net exports. This is the most common form of national income account identity used in most of the literature. The national income account identity shows how domestic output, domestic spending, and net exports are related to one another. So we have nx is equal to y minus c plus I plus g. So net exports is equal to output minus domestic saving, domestic spending. This equation shows that in an open economy, domestic spending need not equal the output of goods and services. Okay, if output exceeds the domestic saving, we export the difference. Net exports are positive, and if output falls short of domestic spending, we import the difference, and net exports are negative. Okay, international capital flows and the trade balance in an open economy, as we have discussed in a closed economy, financial markets and goods markets are closely interlinked with one another. To see this relationship, rewrite national income account identity in terms of saving and investment. Okay, to begin with the identity, we have y is equal to c plus I plus g plus nx. Subtract c and g from both sides to obtain, we have y minus c minus g is equal to I plus nx. So y minus c minus g is national saving is equal to s, which equals the sum of private saving y minus t minus c and public saving t minus g, where we know that t stands for taxes and g for the government spending. Okay, we have s is equal to I plus nx. Subtracting I from both sides of the equation, now write national income account identity as s minus I is equal to nx. This form of national income account identity shows that an economy's net export must always equal the difference between its saving and its investment. So let's look more closely at each part of this identity. So the easy part is the right hand side. We have net exports of goods and services. We can call it trade balance, and on the left hand side we have s minus I is equal to net capital outflow. Okay, while talking about the net capital outflow, we have the net capital outflow equals the amount that domestic residents are lending abroad minus the amount that the foreigners are lending to the country. Okay, if net outflow is positive, the country's or the economy's saving exceeds this investment and it is lending the excess to the foreigners. If the net capital outflow is negative, the economy is experiencing a capital inflow, investment exceeds saving, and the economy is financing this extra investment by borrowing from abroad. Thus, net capital outflow reflect the international flow of funds to finance capital accumulation. Okay, then the national income account identity shows that net capital outflow always equal the trade balance, that is net capital outflow is equal to trade balance, S minus I is equal to NX. If S minus I and NX are positive, there is trade surplus. We are net lender in the world financial markets and we are exporting more goods than we are importing. But if S minus I and NX are negative, there is trade deficit. In this case, we are net borrowers in the world financial markets and we are importing more goods than we are exporting. But if S minus I and N minus X are exactly zero, there is trade balance, because the value of imports equals the value of exports. The the national income account identity shows that international flow of funds to finance capital accumulation and international flow of goods and services are two sides of the same kind. If domestic saving exceeds the domestic investment, the surplus saving is used to make loans to the foreigners. The foreigner require these loans because it provides more goods and services. Okay, if investment exceeds saving, the extra investment must be financed by borrowing from abroad. These foreign loans enable us to import more goods and services than we export. This is known as trade deficit. Note that international flow of capital can take many forms. It is easiest to assume that, as we have done so far, as that when we run a trade deficit, foreigners make loans to us. This happens, for example, when Japanese buy the debt issued by the US corporations or by the US government. But the flow of capital can also take the form of foreigners buying domestic assets, such as when a citizen of Germany buys stock from American or on the US or you can say the New York Stock Exchange. Whether foreigners buy domestically issued debt or domestically owned assets, then they obtain a claim to future return on the domestic capital. In both cases, foreigners end up owning some of the domestic capital outflow. Okay, here we have the international flow of goods and services, goods and capital, and in the summary form. So here we have the trade surplus, trade balance, or trade deficit. If our exports are greater than our imports, we have a trade surplus. If our exports and imports are equal, we are in trade balance. If our exports are less than our imports, we are in a trade deficit. If our net exports are greater than zero, we are in a trade surplus. If our net exports are equal to zero, we are in a trade balance. If our net exports are less than zero, we are in a trade deficit. If our output is greater than our expenditure, we are in a trade surplus. If our output is equal to our expenditure, we are in a trade balance position. And if our output is less than our expenditure, we are in a trade deficit. Our saving is greater than investment, we are in a trade surplus. Saving is less than investment, we are in a trade balance. And saving is equal to investment, we are in a trade deficit. If net capital outflow are greater than, we can say that previous little bit discussion we have some mistakes here. If our saving is greater than our investment, we have a trade surplus. If our saving is equal to investment, we are in a trade balance. If our saving is less than our investment, we are actually experiencing trade deficit. If our net capital outflow is greater than zero, we are in a trade surplus. If our net capital outflow is equal to zero, we are in a trade balance. And if our net capital outflow is less than zero, we are in a trade deficit. Okay, international flows of goods and capital, an empirical example. The equality of net exports and net capital outflow is an identity it must hold because of how the variables are defined and the numbers are added up. Okay, but it is easy to miss the institution behind these important relations. The best way to understand is to consider an example. Imagine that Bill Gates sells a copy of Windows operating system to Japanese consumer for 5,000 yen because Mr. Gates is a US resident. The sales represent an exports of the United States. Other thing equal, US net exports rise. What else happens to make the identity holds? It depends on what Gates does with the 5,000 yen. Suppose Mr. Gates decide to stuff the 5,000 yen in his mattress. In this case, Mr. Gates has allocated some of his saving to an investment in the Japanese economy rather than to an investment in the US economy. Thus, US saving exceed US investment. The rise in US net export is matched by a rise in US net capital outflow. If Mr. Gates wants to invest in Japan, however, he is unlikely to make currency his asset of choice. He might use the 5,000 yen to buy some stock in say the Sony Corporation, or he might buy a bond issued by the Japanese government. In either case, some of US saving is flowing abroad. Once again, the US net capital outflow exactly balances US net exports. The opposite situation occurs in Japan when the Japanese consumer buy a copy of Windows operating system. Japan purchases of goods and services C plus I plus D rise. But there is no change in what Japan has produced. The transaction reduce Japan's saving for a given level of investment, while the US experiences a net capital outflow. Japan's experience a net capital inflow. Now let's change the example. Suppose that instead of investing his 5,000 yen in a Japanese asset, Mr. Gates' use is to buy something made in Japan, such as Sony Walkman MP3 player. In this case, imports into the United States are rise together. The window exports and the Walkman import represent the balanced trade between Japan and the United States. Because exports and imports are rise equally, net exports and net capital outflow are both unchanged. A final possibility is that Mr. Gates exchange his 5,000 yen for the US dollar at a local bank, but this does not change the situation. The banks know has to do something. What the 5,000 yen, it can buy Japanese assets, or it can sell the yen to another American who wants to make such a transaction. If you follow the money, you can see that in the end US net exports must equal US net capital outflow. So this is all about the open economy and how the international flow of capital and goods work. So see you with another video.